Okay. Third time must be the charm. Having trouble getting this video going, but guys, looks like internet's good. The video clip is good. This is previously recorded. I won't go into much detail because I've got an intro, but I do want to say this. The one caveat I will say is that while I do not agree with every single thing that my interviewee says, I do agree on the majority. You'll find one place in there where I've got a little smirk on my face because I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what to do with this information. Anyway, so please excuse that. But for the most part, this is an incredible conversation with wife, mother, and feminist Anne Linstatter. I'm going to introduce her here on the video, so I'm going to get right to it. Thank you for sticking with me. Here we go. I'm going to play it now without further ado, and I'll be back at the end with a little summary. Hello, and welcome to Conversations Christians Suck At. I'm your host, Amy Register with Ask a Christian. And Ask a Christian is a small YouTube and Facebook community dedicated to authentic discussion surrounding the entire Christian faith, the Bible, and following after Jesus. And we don't shy away from difficult conversations. We're having another one of those today. And so, trigger alert, this topic is going to talk about abortion and whether or not we can be Christians talking about this topic with love and understanding. Joining me today is a friend now. We've had a couple of conversations. Her name is Anne Linstatter. She is a writer, a Christian, a feminist. And so I'm hoping that you'll welcome Anne. And Anne, would you tell us a little bit about who you are and your background so that folks can kind of get an idea on what expertise you bring to this discussion about Christianity and abortion?
I'm a wife and mother. Next year, it'll be 50 years of marriage, and my kids are in their 30s. I'm a born-again Christian since around age 15 in Bakersfield, California. I live in Santa Monica. I had a career as a college English teacher, and now I'm retired, and that's probably enough. I'm very active in a lot of feminist organizations, especially Christian feminist organizations, and on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and etc.
And let's talk for a minute about the way that I discovered you, which is when I was trying to look for people who had a different view on this topic and would speak up about it. I took to the interwebs and I found your book on Amazon about stories of several women who had made choices either for or against an abortion in various times of their life. How is it that you found yourself editing a book on this topic in the 90s?
Well, Amy, when abortion became legal in the U.S. in 1973, I was about 24, and I wasn't that interested in the whole issue. I was married, and the church wasn't that interested in it either. Christianity Today had an article just saying, fine, okay, so it's legal for certain situations. But anyway, by the time when that happened, I did ask my mother, who had been a public health nurse in the 1950s in Boulder, well, what do you think? You know, is this okay that abortion's legal? She said, oh, yeah. She said, and she told me a couple of cases, like one was a woman who had 4 kids and was living in a small apartment with her husband and kids and had another pregnancy and wanted an abortion, and could my mother help her find one? And so my mother did her best to help her find one, but the woman ended up not being able to get that abortion. Maybe it was too late or something, and keeping the child and then having the child, and actually the whole thing working out. But my mother used that as an example of situations where women who were responsible and who were already mothers and who were in marriages just felt they couldn't have another child, and where my mother felt that was a reasonable situation for a woman to make with her husband to make that decision. Anyway,
Mm.
so I just thought, okay, that's cool. And I didn't really think about it until about 15 years later, when I was in my 30s with 2 children and had an accidental pregnancy. I mean,
Mhm.
I thought 2 kids was going to be it, but I couldn't convince my husband to have a vasectomy. He's like, oh, that might hurt. And I'm like, yeah, childbirth hurts.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, but then I had a third pregnancy, and I really was conflicted about what to do because I was working full time. I didn't feel I was doing a good job as a mother. I didn't feel I was doing as good a job at work as if I weren't a mother, like some of the single career women teaching in my college. And I just thought, how am I going to add a third child to this mix? You know, is it going to be good for me? Is it going to be good for the child? Anyway, so, and my husband said, you know, it's whatever you think, because it's you're the one who's going to bear more of it than I will, the responsibility, the work, etc. And so I just prayed about it and just decided, okay, somehow this is going to work. You know, I'll trust God that it'll somehow work and not be harmful to the third child or to the first 2 and to my whole sanity, which was actually not very great at the time. Those early years of motherhood and a job, well, 2 jobs in the family, were not easy for me. I'm not the type who like adores children and loves to spend time with kids. I was in a workplace working with young adults for a reason. Anyway, but when I decided to go ahead and have that child, I did a lot of thought about what if the government were telling me I had to bear this child. How would I feel about the child? How would I feel about the government? And how would I treat the child? And would I be sane enough to raise and to be kind to all 3 children? And I just thought, this is really terrible that the government doesn't let me decide what I can cope with. I mean, if it did, that it recently had not. And so, anyway, choice just suddenly became a huge thing for me. And the idea of a woman being forced to bear a child that she had not intended to conceive. And I just thought, it's so important that I'm going to write a book. I'm going to collect the stories of other women who have gone through this and made a decision to not have the child, although in a couple cases to have the child, and just had gone through that as Christians and had prayed about it and had come up with a decision. And many of them to say, no, this isn't something that is a hard line that God says this child has to grow up and be, no matter how insane you are. I mean, we can look at some of the women who ended up killing their children. And I mean, anyway, I don't want to get into that subject, but I decided, okay, I'm going to do a book. I'm going to collect the stories because I already knew some. In fact, one of my early years of teaching, when I would ask my students to write essays on controversial topics, you know, gun control, abortion, etc. And a student had written a story about being raped by her brother-in-law. And when her sister was out of town and the brother-in-law was staying in their apartment or something, and the church okaying her to have an abortion. I mean, the priest, you know, you don't have to bear this child.
Yeah, give us one more example of the kinds of stories that are in the book.
Well, one was a babysitter of my first child when I was living in Daly City, California, near San Francisco. And she was a recent grad of a Christian college. And she told me, I had a pregnancy with a student who was suicidal at my Christian college. And I ended up giving birth and giving the baby away. But she said, my heart breaks for that baby. And then she said, but then I got pregnant again. And I knew this time I couldn't give away a child and not know what became of it and if it were well cared for, etc. and she chose abortion. And so I included her story in my book. And she later married and had 2 kids. So she ended up having a happy, responsible life as a born-again Christian. But those stories don't get out. The PR doesn't let you out. And there was another friend who told me she had been adopted and she had red hair and freckles and knew she had probably had a Catholic birth mother in Oakland, but she never fit into her adoptive family. And when she found out she was pregnant, she said, I could not put a baby through what I went through. Not growing up in a family that wasn't mine and wondering why my mother abandoned me and etc. And she chose abortion. She wouldn't let me put the story in the book because she felt it was too recognizable. But anyway, I just found all these heart-wrenching stories, and I thought, these are the things that get pushed under the rug. These are the things the church doesn't want you to know about. Even pastors who are very, very anti-abortion will go ahead and tell their wife, their daughter, their parishioners, especially if it's conceived as a result of some upstanding elder in the church, you have to have an abortion. But they're still anti-abortion on the surface. So the more I researched and gathered stories, the more I found out. And so anyway, it took me about 7 years to finish the book.
Well, you've been following this topic at least since you wrote the book. And I'm curious to know what you see different about the conversation in the nation and in religious circles. What's different now, almost 20 years later?
Well, I wish more were different. In 1986, when I started the book, and 94 when I finished it, I thought, we'll work on this a few more years and Christians will understand that it's okay for each woman to make a decision, and that it's really wrong for the government to tell a woman, okay, you're pregnant, so you have to be pregnant for 9 months, give up the baby, or keep the baby and somehow support the baby and integrate it into your life. And even if you already have 5 kids. And so anyway, I don't think that much has changed, unfortunately.
What is it about how Christianity has traditionally approached conversations about abortion that concern you?
Well, I would say 3 things make me cringe. One is that Christianity is all about choice. And Christians like choice in terms of choosing to follow Jesus and choosing to be in a covenant with a God who chose us. They don't like choice in other certain situations. And the second thing that concerns me is it's not respecting women. If we really respected women, we would think about what pregnancy is and what 9 months is and what birth is and what 20 years of motherhood is, not to mention 40. And we would think about what it is to build a home and care for children and do housework. And we would value that enough to say, no, that really wouldn't work if you put a woman in a forced situation where she has to do that because the government says, or another Christian says. So that's the first thing that concerns me, is that Christianity is all about choice. But choice, for some Christians, they pick one little area of life and they say, you can't have a choice in this area. And the second thing that concerns me is not respecting women, because the church, unfortunately, has a long history of not respecting women, of not letting women be pastors, priests, bishops, popes, elders. I mean, lots of things that women in various denominations have not been able to be and currently can't be. The Southern Baptists decided around the 1990s and 2000, okay, we have some women ordained pastors, but no, we're not going to have them from now on because it's God's will, So this whole idea of focusing on women. And so I would like to see Christians who really care about the sanctity of life start focusing on men. And if you want to stop abortion, let's start a bunch of sterilization clinics. Let's make vasectomy really easy. In fact, let's pay men $10,000 to get a vasectomy. We don't have to pay $10,000 to people who accuse a woman of having an abortion or someone of helping her. Let's focus on the men. If we want to stop rape, okay, let's sterilize men convicted of rape, men convicted of murder. If they're not going to respect life, why should they be allowed to give life? I mean, I would even say not only a vasectomy, but for rapists and murderers, cut off their testicles. I mean, why are we allowing men rampant ability to use their reproductive powers? And we're saying to women, okay, we're going to decide that you have to do this. And so let's focus on the men. So that's my second. One is, let's really understand and respect motherhood. And then let's focus on the men. And then let's think about what life really means and what the sanctity of life really means. I mean, I think a lot about sanctity of life. And I think if we really thought about sanctity of life in all contexts, we wouldn't get so hyper about the sanctity of life in terms of a beginning pregnancy and put it all on the woman. So, anyway, so those are three things I want us to think about. You know, another thing I think about is that people focus on the baby that is conceived, and they call women a baby killer, or a doctor who performs abortion a baby killer. But we have found in Texas, the statistics are that 70% of the abortions performed are done for women who already have 3, 4 more kids, and they're in a marriage and they don't want another child. So it's not like it's a single woman out there just getting abortions on demand, you know. It's like a family that can't have the strain, and probably a husband who is saying, oh, I can't get a vasectomy, or our church doesn't believe in birth control. We just let God give whoever we get. And so to call them a baby killer, especially when we make scrambled eggs and we put the eggs in the bowl and we see a tiny speck of blood in that bowl, we don't say, oh, that's a chick. I don't want, that's a chick. No, it's not a chick. It's a speck of blood in my egg. And the baby at 4 weeks, 6 weeks is a tiny clot of blood. It's not technically a baby. It's life. It's precious. It could become a child, but it's not baby. So to call women baby killers, and actually then to get on the subject of those 6 weeks, they start counting the 6 weeks the day you get impregnated, the day you have sex. If you conceive on that day, they say you're already 2 weeks pregnant. And technical medical authorities say, okay, you're 2 weeks pregnant because you're 2 weeks from the end of your last period. So the day you conceive, you're 2 weeks pregnant. The day your period should come and doesn't, you're 4 weeks pregnant. And if your period is 2 weeks late, and you think, oh, I hope it comes soon, then you're 6 weeks pregnant, they say, but you're actually 4 weeks since the conception. So this whole idea of trying to figure this out when you're actually technically the embryo was fertilized 4 weeks ago, and they say you're 6 weeks pregnant. And in the Bible and in olden times, quickening was when they said, okay, life is precious. And that's around 24 weeks. That's 6 months. And, 40 months is what we consider a pregnancy, but actually it's 36 months plus the 2 weeks before you're conceiving the child, and maybe 2 weeks more if the child is late. So to this whole thing about 6 weeks is unfair for women, and it's disrespect for life, for what happens when life is conceived, for the miracles within my uterus and the implantation and what's going on. It's refusing to look at any of that but to stick to an ideal that puts all the responsibility on the woman and none on the man.
And last time we talked, we mentioned that there's an issue with vocabulary surrounding abortion, and that really bugged you and made you cringe. Do you want to bring that up again?
Okay, well, besides baby killer, no one is pro-abortion. This idea that a whole lot of people out there favor abortion, think it's great, that's a myth. That's not true. There are people who want abortion to be legal. For people who personally say, I can't bring a child to this earth at this time in my situation without the supports and without maybe the sanity or the health that I need. And so nobody is out there saying, yay, abortions are so great. They're stressful on a woman's body like any medical procedure. So let's just give up that thing that people are pro-choice. They're pro-women having the respect to make their own decisions with their husband, with their pastor, with their family, but they're not out there. And the second thing is this idea of abortion on demand. Okay, people don't walk into a clinic and say, I demand an abortion. They say, you know, I have a pregnancy and this is my situation, and you have to go through counseling and you have to figure it out. And before she walks in, she's talked with her friends, with her boyfriend, maybe with her, maybe with her parents. Maybe she can't possibly admit to her parents what has happened. But the idea that we go around demanding this, that, or the other, I mean, is that really offends me. And the third thing is to call a woman who gets an abortion selfish. She may be making her decision in prayer with God, before God, with many tears. And she may be saying, the best thing for the baby is for it not to come. That I need to give this little soul back to God, because if I take it now and give it to someone else, who knows what will become of it and what will become of me worrying about it. If I bear it in a situation where it's not welcome to my parents, to my boyfriend, to my financial situation, to my mental stability, then that's not a selfish decision to give up this idea of women out there having a great time and being selfish. Yeah, I think it's the men who are out there having a great time being selfish, and they could care less whether women get impregnated or not. You know, how many of them are responsibly using birth control? It's always the woman who has to, you know, go get the pill, remember to take the pill every day for 3 weeks, and then not take it, and then take it, and remember, and check her periods and keep track, and, you know, and do the pregnancy and do the childbirth. I mean, I don't know, the whole idea of women who get an abortion being selfish is just such a disrespectful attitude toward women. And that's my view.
Yeah, I think the things that I hear you saying repeatedly that really resonate with me are that somebody may be making this decision in every bit of love they can muster up, whether or not they're Christian. Christianity should see, we should rise above and recognize, even if we did believe that every single embryo or fetus was God's design and was God's purpose. We believe that at some level, even if we did, because we realize that this is a world that has gone berserk from God's original plan. We have to realize that we can't make that call for everybody, that they may not have our shared values. They certainly may not have our shared support. And that what you're saying is it is the choice that you'd like to afford people. Nobody wants to end a life. That's nobody's goal.
Yes. And, you know, God grieves when a life ends. God grieves when someone's murdered, when we die of cancer, when there's a car accident, when there's a war and someone's killed. God does a lot of grieving, let's face it. And God grieves when a little life is started in a situation where the woman isn't going to be able to be responsible. The man is long gone. The parents are angry. I mean, God grieves, but that doesn't mean that we have to regulate this situation while we allow rampant death in other situations. And one thing I'd like to do today is to read a poem that I wrote when my first baby was conceived. And this is long before I ever thought of writing a book that was pro-choice. I wasn't really very interested in the whole abortion issue because I was married, I was having my first baby, everything was hunky-dory. And so I wrote a poem to the baby, and I thought about the baby as like a nun or monk in a cell inside the uterus, like prayerfully breathing and not breathing, but pulsing before God. So I called it To an Anchorite, which is a special type of nun or monk. And so I'll just read it if it's okay with you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and this was published in Christianity and Literature, a publication that a lot of English teachers belong to who are Christians, and other French teachers, etc. A flash of light, of energy, and suddenly you beheld the face of the Lord prayerfully in your cell. And we're talking one cell right now. The cilia swished, and a rhythm began in the waters of your soul, whispering, Yahweh, Yahweh. You floated in the currents of the deep until you found an anchor hold, a place to gaze in profound silence upon your Maker. The prayer in you grew, praise God, and throbbed in a one-chambered heart. You stretched forth arms, then hands in prayer. I am marvelously made. The cells of your being pulsed with praise, day and night, ceaselessly, breathless with adoration. With closed eyes, you beheld glory. You dwelt in the house of the Lord, in the hand of the Lord, joyfully. O my child, come not into this world, this unquiet world. Do not open your eyes to lose that sight. Do not come into this world of appetite and hunger, of striving and gaining, that which does not satisfy. Your birth will be death, and it will take many years to learn to pray again. After that birth, you will be glad of another death. And the death I'm referring to is the death of Jesus on the cross. And I write that poem as a reply to T.S. Eliot's poem, The Journey of the Magi. And there's a line that says, I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. So I respect life. I care deeply about that fertilized egg. It's life. It's not a baby. It's a cell. It's a zygote. It's a collection of small cells that would become a baby if you let it grow. Hopefully, in most cases, it would. But please respect women and their thoughts about their bodies and their babies, and don't let the government tell you, oh, you have to do this, and think that that's going to have a positive outcome for the baby and for the woman. I'm not so sure about that.
And I want to ask you one more question before we go today. And it's kind of a reflective question, but one that I think Christians are dealing with, and people who, especially people who have an evangelical mindset, who want to tell the story of Jesus, who know that his ways are good. And so I put myself in this category. We don't do a great job talking with or to people who have struggled with making the decisions on abortion in the past, people who are making those decisions now. They exist in our church and our youth groups. We'd love to think that, our people don't suffer through this, but being a Christian doesn't save us from suffering. So if we wanted to be a safe church, if we wanted to create a version of Christianity that let people know they could come to us with these hard decisions and be in their circle for counsel at these times, what would we have to change? What would we have to do or say differently to become a safe space for women dealing with this?
Wow, that's a great question that I've never thought about. You know, on other issues, you can just say, well, this church is inclusive, and that covers maybe LGBT or something. But I've never seen a church that said, okay, we're in favor of legal abortion as part of their like PR on their website. Well, I think we need to be more vocal about where our church stands if our church does want to take an understanding position. So to put on your website, you know, we have a women's group that discusses difficult situations, or to announce it from the pulpit, to have sermons once in a while about difficult decisions women make, about responsibility of men. How many sermons have there been about that? But I think most important would be some kind of support group for women in a church who want to share their own story, whether they've had an abortion, have thought about it but didn't choose abortion, or have no experience but want to understand more deeply. So I think a small ongoing support group for women who just want to talk about it and want to understand and want to be less polemic and more Christ-like in understanding would be a great thing to do.
Wow, I could not agree more with that part. Thank you so much for being with me today, Anne. Thank you for your unique perspective. Will you tell us how people can get your book if they'd like to check it out, and how they might be able to contact you?
Oh, well, this is my book. It was published in 1994. It's called Abortion, My Choice, God's Grace. And it has women, pastors' wives, and all kinds of women who made abortion decisions. Most of them who did have an abortion, some who didn't. Then it also has stories of women who worked, protected women outside of clinics when there were more shootings of people inside clinics. Anyway, it's available from Amazon and from probably other online sources like Barnes and Noble. My email and accessibility is available on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. So I'm just Anne Linstatter at gmail.com. So.
All right, thank you. And before we go, is there any other bit of parting wisdom or anything you wanted to reiterate? Is there anything you're working on next that you want to share? Give us a little bit more as we head out.
Well, I'd just like to quote this 19th century rabbi, Jewish rabbi, who was studying a passage in the Old Testament about how much you should pay a woman who is injured and the baby. And so it's not about abortion. It's about repaying the loss to a family of a child. But he says, he has a famous quote that I have on T-shirts, and it's in that poster there, but it says, no woman is required to build the world by destroying herself. So he just, in the early 19th century, studying these scriptures, decided, you know, that's not God's will, that a woman do something like endanger her own life in order to protect the life within her, and and even destroy her own sanity, health, whatever.
All right, Anne, it has been a pleasure. Thank you again for joining me. Some of you know that this is the second time I've interviewed Anne. I lost our interview the first time, so she was so gracious to hang out with me again. Therefore, I beseech you, buy her book, send her money and gifts. Thanks so much, Anne. Appreciate your time and wishing you the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, there it is. Finally got it out with all the internet problems, and That was the hardest interview that I've ever done, both because the content is difficult and because there are just so many technical difficulties. So I'm looking forward to your feedback. I'm looking forward to parsing this out with you a little bit. I know it is a really, really a hot potato topic. So here's the summary. Here's the stuff that I got out of this for me. And again, like I said at the beginning, some of the stuff that she's talking about, I 100% personally agree with, and other stuff, not as much. Regardless, just really appreciate the perspective. So here are 3 things that Anne focuses on that you heard during the interview. Number 1, she really hits on the responsibility of men, wanting to make sure men have access to cheap and easy vasectomies, and wanting the general population to realize that these women that we may be standing in judgment on, wondering why they're not responsible, why they're not taking care of it, they may be in relationships with men where the man is still really dictating what she does with her body. Even within a marriage, women may have less choice than we think or that we see. And so I thought that was interesting, something that I hadn't thought about before, are a lot of the abortions that people pursue within a happy, healthy marriage, or at least within a marriage. Number 2, Anne talks a lot about the sanctity of life, and she wants us to apply that protection to women as well as the baby, the fetus, at least. Women are set apart and holy and have plans. God has plans for their lives as well. And so, especially in some of those camps that say every single pregnancy must come to term, she's saying, hey, that might not be necessarily be God's plan. One of the things where Anne and I really see eye to eye is on this sanctity of life from beginning throughout your life. So everything from baby and youth, adolescent, and adulthood is holy and designed by God, not just the baby, not just the fetus. And so quality of life would be vastly important to a God of love. Bringing a child into the world only to expose them to a situation where they're unwanted, to abuse, neglect, a life full of pain, leaving them to be raised by a government system instead of loving parents, perhaps would be even more of a departure for God's plan for their life than for them to not exist at all. So that's kind of the argument that has really gotten me as I work with people and minister. I hear stories about people who are not wanted, and praise God, a portion of them, do find worth and meaning in God, in the church, in service. Sometimes not in Christianity, but through other religions, they find a sense of worth. That's beautiful. And that is the story that I wish everyone could experience. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And so that's kind of where Anne and I see eye to eye on, if a woman is foreseeing that for the future of her kid, maybe it is a sense of love that drives her to seek that abortion. And then finally, the third thing Anne talks a lot about is choice as a reflection of God's good character. Ultimately, if we believe that God is a God of free will, we realize that even if maybe as a church or a religion or a denomination, if we can't endorse abortion, we can still recognize that women within our ranks have prayerfully made that decision with their community and have come to the conclusion, whatever it is, that they are making the best decision for that baby. And so we need to back off from judgment in that. For non-Christians, trying to enforce Christianity's values when we haven't even brought people into our community, we haven't even begun to love them, is really off-putting. And then Anne talks about the government being the final say. So that would apply to any and everyone. Why would you want the government to be able to tell you what to do or what not to do? And so those are kind of the 3 main things that she talks about. Some really resonate with me. And then, some of the others, not quite as much. But again, regardless, the whole point of this series, Conversations Christians suck at, is to realize we're not talking about these things in our churches as much as we should. If we are, it's usually from a judgmental and morally superior standpoint where we believe we know exactly what God wants. And I just don't find that to be true. I find that every situation is different, and that when we get down to the nitty gritty, when I talk to each human going through this, they really have put a lot into it. Of course, there are people who haven't. There's a minority who will continue to use, this as a birth control method. And for that, we are mournful. But for the most part, the people that I talk to, I simply would like for them to have a choice, even though personally, I really, really hope that every little fetus full of cells comes into this world and gets the opportunity to know love and to know God. So that's it. That's our 40 minutes. It's up, and I really appreciate it. I've got one more on this series, Conversations Christians Suck At. It's going to be on sex and sexuality, sex outside of marriage, why Christians seem to make that the biggest deal at every youth camp ever. So it'll be fun to talk about some different perspectives on that, and trying to hold true to what we believe God is saying in those verses, in those moments, while extending grace and love to everybody. That's the goal. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time on Ask a Christian. Bye for now.